Good evening and welcome to Sunmero Temple. We're so happy you've joined us. My name is Alba and I use she, her pronouns. This is our second May observance and I'm so happy you are here. As always, this service is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. I'm thrilled to announce that we have 3 ongoing events, including our community art project, of which there are a lot of different pieces left, so if you are fearing you missed it, definitely don't come join us. Our play, Oedipus Rex, which we'll be beginning rehearsals on, and when we put the whole thing together, definitely come and enjoy our performance. And our upcoming virtual field trip. So please definitely come and join us for all of these events. They will be quite fun. We'll open today with our opening words, which will appear on the slide behind you. Please read along at home or listen as I read the words aloud. We welcome you into the light of the gods and light this flame in celebration. May its brightness symbolize our connection to the gods and the natural world. May you join us in this community of faith, cherishing love and with open hearts. So if you remember, our theme this month is coming of age, partially because people are graduating this month, and also genuinely because it's very applicable for the world today. So our readings today are Only the Republic by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. And I understand that the Republic is a little bit of a hard text to understand sometimes, so if you're struggling with it, feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and I will happily clarify what is being read. So we will now jump into the Republic. Then we have found the desired natures, and now that we have found them, how are they to be reared and educated? Is not this an inquiry which may be expected to throw light on the greater inquiry which is our final end? How do justice and injustice grow up in states? For we do not want either to omit what is the point or to draw out the argument to an inconvenient length. Adeimantus thought that the inquiry would be of great service to us. Then I said, my dear friend, the task must not be given up, even if somewhat long. Certainly not. Come then, and let us pass a leisurely hour in storytelling, and our story shall be the education of our heroes, by all means. And what shall be their education? Can we find a better than the traditional sort? And this has 2 divisions, gymnastics for the body and music for the soul. True. Shall we begin education with music and go on to gymnastics afterwards? By all means. And when you speak of music, do you include literature or not? I do, and literature may be either true or false. Yes, and the young should be trained in both kinds, and we begin with the false. I do not understand your meaning, he said. You know, I said, that we begin by telling children stories, which, though not wholly destitute of truth, are in the main fictitious, and these stories are told them when they are not an age to learn gymnastics. Very true. That was my meaning when I said that we must teach music before gymnastics. Quite right, he said. You know also that the beginning is the most important of any work, especially in the case of a young and tender thing, for that is the time at which the character is being formed and the desired impression is readily taken. Quite true. And shall we just carelessly allow children to hear any casual tales which may be devised by casual persons, and to receive into their minds ideas for the most part the very opposite of those which we should wish them to have when they are grown up? We cannot. Then the first thing will be to establish a censorship of the writers of fiction, and let the censors receive any tale of fiction which is good and reject the bad. And we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized ones only. Let them fashion the mind with such tales even more fondly than they mold the body with their hands. But most of those which are now in use must be discarded. Of what tales are you speaking? He said. You may find a model of the lesser in the greater, I said, for they are necessarily of the same type, and there is the same spirit in both of them. Very likely, he replied, but I do not as yet know what you would term the greater. Those, I said, which are narrated by Homer and Hesiod and the rest of the poets who have ever been the great storytellers of mankind. But which stories do you mean? He said, and what fault do you find with them? A fault which is most serious, I said, the fault of telling a lie, and what is more, a bad lie. But when is this fault committed? Whenever an erroneous representation is made of the nature of gods and heroes, as when a painter paints a portrait not having the shadow of a likeness to the original. Yes, he said, that sort of thing is certainly very blamable, but what are the stories which you mean? First of all, I said, there was the greatest of all lies in high places, which the poet told about Uranus, and which was a bad lie too. I mean, what did Hesiod says that Uranus did, and how Cronos retaliated on him, the doings of Cronos and the sufferings which in turn his son inflicted upon him, even if they were true, ought certainly not to be lightly told to young and thoughtless persons. If possible, they had better be buried in silence. But if there is an absolute necessity for their mention, a chosen few might hear them in the mystery. They should sacrifice not a common pig, but some huge and unprocurable victim, and then the number of the hearers will be very few indeed. Why, yes, he said, those stories are extremely objectionable. Yes, Adamantius, they are stories not to be repeated in our state. The young man should not be told that in committing the worst of crimes he is far from doing anything outrageous, and that even if he chastises his father when he does wrong, in whatever manner, he will only be following the example of the first and greatest among the gods. I entirely agree with you, he said. In my opinion, those stories are quite unfit to be repeated. Neither if we mean our future guardians to regard the habit of quarrelling among themselves as of all things the basest, should any word be said to them of the wars in heaven, and of the plots and fightings of the gods against one another. For they are not true. No, we shall never mention the battles of the giants, nor or let them be embroidered on garments, and we shall be silent about the innumerable other quarrels of gods and heroes with their friends and relatives. If they would only believe us, would tell them that quarreling is unholy, and that never up until this time has there been any quarrel between citizens. This is what old men and old women should begin by telling children. And when they grow up, the poets should also be told to compose for them in a similar spirit. But the narrative of Hephaestus binding Here, his mother, or how on another occasion Zeus sent him flying for taking her part when she was beaten, and all the battles of the gods in Homer, these tales must not be admitted into our state, whether they are supposed to have an allegorical meaning or not. For a young person cannot judge what is allegorical and what is literal. Anything that he receives into his mind at that age is likely to become indelible and unalterable, and therefore it is most important that the tales which the young hear first should be models of virtuous thoughts. There you are right, he replied, but if one asks where are such models to be found, and of what tales you are speaking, how shall we answer him? I said to him, you and I, Adamantus, at this moment are not poets, but founders of a state. Now the founders of a state ought to know the general form in which poets should cast their tales, and the limits which must be observed by them, but to make the tales is not their business. Very true, he said. But what are these forms of theology you mean? Something of this kind, I replied. God is always to be represented as he truly is, whatever be the sort of poetic, epic, lyric, or tragic in which the representation is given. Right. And is he not truly good, and must he not be represented as such? Certainly. And no good thing is hurtful. No, indeed. And that which is not hurtful hurts not. Certainly not. And that which hurts not does no evil. No. And that which does no evil can be a cause of evil. Impossible. And the good is advantageous. Yes. And therefore the cause of well-being. Yes. It follows therefore that all the good is not the cause of all things, but of the good only. Assuredly. Then God, if he be good, is not the author of all things, as the many assert, but he is the cause of a few things only, and not of most things that occur to men. For few are the goods of human life, and many are the evils, and the good is to be attributed to God alone. Of the evils the causes are to be sought elsewhere and not in him. That appears to me to be most true, he said. Then we must not listen to Homer, or to any other poet who is guilty of the folly of saying that two casks lie at the threshold of Zeus, the full of lots, one of good, the other of evil lots. And that he to whom Zeus gives a mixture of the two sometimes meets with evil fortune, at other times with good. But that he who is given the cup of unmingled ill, wild hunger drives over the beauteous earth. And again, Zeus, who is the dispenser of good and evil to us. And if anyone asserts that the violation of oaths and treaties, which is really the work of Pandarus, was brought about by Athene and Zeus, or that the strife and contention of the gods was instigated by Themis and Zeus, he shall not have our approval. Neither will we allow our young men to hear the words of Asclepius that God plants guilt among men when he desires utterly to destroy a house. And if a poet writes of the sufferings of Niobe, the subject of the tragedy in which these iambic verses occur, or the house of Pelops, or of the Trojan War, or in any similar theme, either we must not permit him to say that these are the works of God, or if they are of God, he must devise some explanation of them such as we are seeking. He must say that God did what was just and right, and that they were better for being punished, but that those who are punished are miserable, and that God is the author of their misery. The poet is not to be permitted to say. Though he may say that the wicked are miserable because they require to be punished, and are benefited by receiving punishment from God. But that God is good is the author of evil to any one is to be strenuously denied, and not to be said or sung or heard in verse or prose by any one, whether old or young, in any well-ordered commonwealth. Such a fiction is suicidal, ruinous, and impious. I agree with you, he replied, and am ready to give my assent to the law. Okay, I've put a cut in here because that was a section, so we'll move on to the next section. There is a danger lest they should taste the dear delight too early. For youngsters, as you may have observed, when they first get the taste in their mouths, argue for amusement, and are always contradicting and refusing others in imitation of those who refute them. Like puppy dogs, they rejoice in pulling and tearing at all who come near them. Yes, he said, there is nothing which they like better. And when they have made many conquests and received defeats at the hands of many, they violently and speedily get into a way of not believing anything which they believed before, and hence not only they, but philosophy and all that relates to it is apt to have a bad name with the rest of the world. Too true, he said. But when a man begins to get older, he will no longer be guilty of such insanity. He will imitate the dialectician who is seeking for truth, and not the eristic who is contradicting for the sake of amusement, and the greater moderation of his character will increase instead of diminishing the honor of the pursuit. Very true, he said. And did we not make special provision for this when we said that the disciples of philosophy were to be orderly and steadfast, not, as now, any chance aspirant or intruder? Very true. Suppose, I said, the study of philosophy to take place of gymnastics, and to be continued diligently and earnestly and exclusively for twice the number of years which were passed in bodily exercise. Will that be enough? Would you say 6 or 4 years? He asked. Say 5 years, I replied. At the end of the time they must be sent down again into the den and compelled to hold any military or other office which young men are qualified to hold. In this way they will get their experience of life, and there will be an opportunity of trying whether, when they are drawn all manner of ways by temptation, they will stand firm or flinch. And how long is the stage of their lives to last? 15 years, I answered. And when they have reached 50 years of age, let those who still survive and have distinguished themselves in every action of their life and in every branch of knowledge come at last to their consummation. The time has now arrived at which they must raise the eye of the soul to the universal light which lightens all things, and behold the absolute good, for that is the pattern according to which they are in order to order the states and the lives of individuals, and the remainder of their own lives also, making philosophy their chief pursuit, but, when their turn comes, toiling also at politics and ruling for the public good, not as though they were performing some heroic action, but simply as a matter of duty. And when they have brought up in each generation others like themselves, and left them in their place to be governors of the state, they will then depart to the Isles of the Blessed and dwell there, and the city will give them public memorials and sacrifices and honor them, if the Pythian oracle consent, as demigods, but if not, as in any place blessed and divined. You are a sculptor, Socrates, and have made statues of our governess faultless in beauty. Yes, I said, Glaucon, and of our governesses too, for you must not suppose that what I have said applies to men only and not to women, as far as their natures can go. There you are right, he said, since we have made them to share in all things like men. Well, I said, and you would agree, would you not, that what has been said about the state and the government is not a mere dream, and although difficult, not impossible, but only possible in the way which has been supposed. That is to say, when the true philosopher kings are born in a state, one or more of them, despising the honors of this present world, which they deem meaningless and worthless, esteeming above all things right and the honor that springs from right, and regarding justice as the greatest and most necessary of all things, whose ministers they are, and whose principles will be exalted by them when they set in order their own city. How will they proceed? They will begin by sending out into the country all the inhabitants of the city who are more than 10 years old, and will take possession of their children, who will be unaffected by the habits of their parents. These they will train in their own habits and laws, I mean in the laws which we have given them, and in this way the state and constitution of which we are speaking will soonest and most easily attain happiness, and the nation which has such a constitution will gain most. Yes, that will be the best way, and I think, Socrates, that you have very well described how, if ever, such a constitution might come into being. Enough said then of the perfect state, and of the man who bears its image. There is no difficulty in seeing him how we shall describe him. There is no difficulty, he replied, and I agree with you in thinking that nothing more needs to be said. So in this very long set of readings from Plato's Republic, we clearly hear his thoughts on how we should be educating our young people, and he identifies specifically in here what we would call the teenager stage, which is a new development as most societies transition only from child to adult. The teenager is a rather new stage. He also, however, has what many today would consider a really bad method of education, entailing the censorship of entire elements and feelings of humanity to prevent the supposed corruption of the youth. I really want us to think about how he might have developed this system of education and belief and why he thought this was the best system. If, as we saw in previous elements, many of the children are dying, how valuable is it as a society to protect them? And how do you value society as a whole? How would this form of education affect their coming of age, especially if they're not coming of age until their 50s, as he mentions in there? As you might have realized, this ended up being a more poignant topic than I suspected. And so I really want you to consider what he says specifically and the potential dangers of the system, even if there are what he considers his philosopher kings in charge. And who would be a philosopher king? So we'll now move into the ritual portion of the observance, and I will play the video. We leave this offering for our gods to symbolize our connection and devotion. We gift this rock to symbolize the stability of the gods in our world. We gift this water to accept the flow of our lives. We welcome life and bless our offerings with oil to share our riches. We embrace our connection to each other and the world and celebrate our revival. Okay, we'll now move into the closing words. And as always, you're free to read them aloud with me or listen as I read them aloud. As we move out into the world, let us remember our community of faith. Cherish love and open your heart as you walk through life. Hold dear the light of the gods and our connection with the natural world. Go forth in celebration and carry the light of connection within your heart.